All right, I'm going to start up. Hopefully you see on your screen right now, I have not had to change this, and I shouldn't have to. This is the schedule. Now, there are still, as far as I know, everybody has turned in those balsamic exercises. There are still, I think, 2 of you who have not turned in the project one, what you're going to be doing for your project, plus a simple wireframe of it. All right, that's worth 250 points. So right now that's in there as a 0 in the grade book, and that really, as you probably guess, affects your grade. So please get that in as soon as you or quickly as you possibly can. So I was just saying that what we have up on the screen right here basically is the schedule for the rest of the semester. I have not changed it. To my knowledge, just about everybody, if not everybody, has got those 2 balsamic exercises done. What was due last week, I was supposed to give you project part 2. I didn't. So I've got to try to, I've got it someplace online. I've got to get that to you today. So no, it won't be due Friday. It'll be due a week from today. All right. And what that's basically going to be is I'd like to see a prototype of what you're going to do. It doesn't have to work. All right. But if you're going to have 3 or 4 screens in it, I'd like you to at least be able to jump from screen to screen, etc. So I can see that you've made some progress. Again, if you have not finished part 1, which is worth 250 points, please get that done as quickly as you possibly can. Now, I'm going to lecture in just a few minutes, and when I do, it's going to be on Unit 9. Tomorrow, we're going to actually create a project, a very simple to-do list in Android. We'll do that as a class. So the homework for Unit 9 will be for you to follow along with me and turn in that assignment. It'll be the same thing a week from tomorrow when we go through a program for Unit 10. All right, let's see. So that's pretty much that. 2 weeks from today, I hope to show you the App Store submit, and it was interesting. Let me see if I can find this. I don't know if it's on here or not. There's a couple things I wanted to show you before we get started, though. Oops, I don't know if I got the right one there or not. Try that again. All right. This is, I put this into the App Store, I don't know, probably I think a couple of years ago. I didn't put anything out there last year. And interesting, this app is incompatible with your device. But I created this totally from scratch. You come in here and you put in your name, you put in your birth date, you click calculate. It tells you exactly how old you are to the day. It's similar, at least somewhat, to the stuff that I had shown you before and what I had you do on that Zodiac program, because it does give you your astrological sign. It also gives you your Chinese New Year sign. And as it says, the user inputs his or her name and their birth date, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is, I've got something out there, so I've gone through the entire process. I even had one person comment on it. Lots of potential, great effort. Keep on coming out with those updates. Well, I never updated it from almost 2 years ago, so I guess that didn't happen. All right. Couple other things that I wanted to mention to you. I just wanted you to see these things. Where are we? All right, so let me. All right. There are some really good websites out there, as you could probably guess. Some are really good, some are not that good. But one guy that I watch on a fairly regular basis is a guy, it's called codingwithmitch.com. And his stuff it's solely on Android. His name is Mitch Tabian. And he offers a lot of stuff for free, and he offers a lot of courses that you can pay for as well. I started watching this a long time ago. He's got this, it's called SQLite for Beginners 2019, so it was made last year. But you know, when you click to get started, I don't know if you guys can see everything that's on the screen or not, but there's a lot of stuff in here. And he takes you in here, supposing you don't even have Android on your system. So you'd be able to skip a lot of the stuff that's in here. It's like installing Android Studio, how to create your first app, etc. But like I said, there's a lot of good stuff in there. All right. The other thing that I wanted to make sure, yeah, I know I keep beating the same drum, but I want to make sure that you hear this is first. All right. As it says here, you know, you should be getting in the Unit 5 homework, which were those 3 apps. I'm not going to go over them again. We've gone over them before. All right. You can see again what the rubric is for this. And then finally, all right, and about half of you have turned in this Zodiac program, which means about half of you have not. And I said you could have till the end of the period today, but to my knowledge, everything that has been turned in, even a couple of you who turned in things today, everything has been graded and it is up to date. Other than if you turned in that Zodiac test, I have not graded that. So please take a look, go out to Inside Rankin, take a look, and if you're behind on anything, especially if you're behind but you have it ready to turn in, please turn it in as quickly as you possibly can. Thank you for that. All right. Let's see. All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about saving user data. I don't know when you're looking over there if I totally get off out of any shares, and I'm not going to do that if you can see me or not. But I went in today, and as I mentioned, and I'm not kidding you, I probably printed an entire ream's worth of paper, and I'm not exaggerating, on both sides. All right, and one of the things that I did was this program that we're going to do tomorrow. And I will be able to show you that tomorrow, but I wanted to go in and I wanted to add some comments to the program, because right now there's virtually no comments in there whatsoever. But a lot of the stuff that's mentioned in here under this shared preferences section, and we're going to go over it in just a minute, but a lot of the stuff that's in there, all right, it'll be, I think, make a lot more sense when you see it in, you know, in practice, so to speak, tomorrow. So again, the idea is today we'll go over lesson 9. I'm not going to be surprised if we're done by 2 to 2:15. All right, and then the rest of the period will be lab. Tomorrow when you come in, please start up Android Studio. We're going to create a project as a class. Just call it like ToDo List or something like that. And it'll be, it won't be an empty app. It'll be I think it's a basic activity. It's the one with the little button on the bottom right-hand corner. So we're going to create that, and I'm going to show you how you can manipulate that button. All right, so that's the way, that's going to take, I don't know how much of the period, but at least some of it tomorrow. It's not, you're not going to have to type hundreds of lines of code, but you'll have to do some typing. All right, and then again, next week, so a week from today, I will lecture, and I'm going to lecture on SQLite Database, and then we're going to go over an example. I hope we're going to make some kind of a fairly simple RDBMS, you know, relational database management system, a week from tomorrow. I haven't created it yet, so I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do. And then 2 weeks from today, We will go over, I will walk through the steps on how to go and take an Android project and submit it to the App Store. I'm still working on that resume. I want it to work. I put in about an hour or so on it every day. And it's funny because I'll make changes and it'll run with no errors. I'll make some more changes and then it'll run and it'll show me some runtime errors and it goes back and forth. But I do want to get it to work. I want to make that available to you. All right. And ideally, you're going to use that as you're out looking for a job. I mean, I know right now this is probably the worst time in the world to be looking for a job. A lot of people have lost their jobs. And you can go out there and take a look. I have not looked at Indeed lately, to be honest with you. All right. So let's jump into Unit 4, saving user data. All right. Now, every single thing that we've done thus far, when you run an app and you input something, you process it, you get some kind of output, everything that we have done up until this point, nothing's saved. All right. So in other words, it does not persist over different sessions. What we'll do tomorrow is we will create this to-do list. All right. And not only will it be a to-do list, but it'll be a to-do list that'll actually have a recycler view in it that won't do very much other than to list our different to-do list items. All right. But what you'll find out is even if you get out of Android Studio and you come back in again, the items that you had in your to-do list will still be there. All right. It's going to give me a chance to show you a few other things as well. So one way, of course, that you can always save is you can use regular files. And I believe, I could be wrong on this, but I believe that when we were doing that stuff at the beginning of the semester, when we were going through all those payroll and different kinds of examples, I thought we did one with files, but we might not have. All right. Working with files in Android is very, very similar to working with files in C#. It's not that it's that difficult. It's a little, for lack of better words, clumsy. All right. And most people will tell you that when they're going to save data, if what they're saving is not that big a data, in other words, if you're saving a lot of little things, so maybe you've got a game that you're creating for your final project and you want to save the high score, or maybe the highest 5 scores. All right. It's not worth putting that into a file. It's not worth putting that into a database. Probably what you'd use for that would be something like shared preferences, which we'll talk about in just a second. So you can see in this section, they talk about shared preferences, files, SQLite Database, room persistence library, other storage options. So as it says, what you choose is going to depend on your specific needs, whether the data should be private to your app or accessible. When we go through this to-do list tomorrow, we will set up our context mode. You'll see it in this chapter as well. We will set our context mode to private, which is the default, but it's good to set it anyway. And what that means is that this data can only be shared within our program itself, within our app. If we want to allow the user to share data between apps, you'll see how to do that in shared preferences also a little bit later. Notice again, as it says, it's sharing, when it's storing data, it's storing it in key value pairs. Again, you're going to see that as we go through. All right. Then there's internal storage, as it mentions, store private data on the device's memory itself. External storage, where you put it, as it says, in shared external storage. SQLite databases, which we will cover next week. Now, when we do this next week, we're going to go through an application, but I am not going to spend 1 second of time going over, this is an insert, this is an update, this is how you do a delete. We're not going to do that, except in how it is done basically in the context of Android. All right. Okay, the room persistence library, as it says, it's part of the Android architecture. Notice it caches an SQL database locally. So in other words, it's used in conjunction to kind of supercharge SQLite. All right. Cloud backup, Firebase, and a lot of stuff that's done today is people who use databases are using Firebase. Notice what it says, store and sync data with a no SQL cloud. Well, there's two things people like about that. First of all, it's storing it out on the cloud. Second of all, since it's using no SQL, typically you don't need, with no SQL, you don't need much, if any, SQL knowledge in order to be able to use it. All right. Finally, as it says, there's a custom data store where you can configure your own preference APIs to store data. We're going to concentrate in this chapter, we're going to concentrate almost solely on shared preferences. And in the next chapter, we're going to concentrate virtually solely on SQLite databases, just so you're aware of both those. Now, this is kind of a prelude to the shared preferences section. They just give you a paragraph here. All right. But they do come in and they talk about a little bit here about internal versus external storage. All right. It's kind of, I kind of liken this to putting something on your hard drive versus literally putting it on an external drive. All right. With internal storage, again, I'm not going to go through this section. You don't need any permissions to save files on it. Your app always has permission to read that. They go through it. What you're going to find is whether you're working with files, regular storage, or databases, typically you do a lot of your work inside of try-catch blocks. You're going to see that a lot next period that we're going to, or a week from now. And when we talk about databases and SQLite, why? Just because things can happen. All right. And you don't typically want an app to crash on your phone. So, okay. You've got more control with putting it in the try catch. External, as it says, for files that should be permanently stored, even if your app is uninstalled, and be available freely to other users and apps such as pictures, etc. And again, the cloud would be something popular for this. SQLite database, again, which we will cover next week. Says it's good. It's a good database for repeating or structured data. Well, it's good for database data. All right. And it says the SQLite primer chapter gives you an overview of using an SQLite database. It's not bad. Okay. It's like most of the other stuff in this book. All right. It is not what I would call a real meaty chapter. Now, I have no idea. I have not talked to Ms. Bruggeman in a while. I have no idea if they are still planning on doing evaluations for the class. All right. And, if I ask you to do evals, you could do it and be honest, and you can say, yeah, but you're going to get it back. So what I might do is, if I don't hear from her regarding that, is I'll probably send out evals. But the good news is I won't, I will ask you to turn them in on Thursday, May 7th. Why? Because you're done by then and grades have already been turned in. So it's not like you would ever have to think, oh, I'm not going to be honest with him because he's going to, he's going to hold this against me or whatever. I will tell you, I found this book or whatever you want to call it that you're using. If you think, yeah, it sucks, you should write that down. It will not be used again. I think we need to go back to a regular book. You may agree with that. You may not agree with that. The problem is when Mr. Smith and I get together on books, it's almost kind of a north and south kind of thing. I'm more concerned with you understanding the basics and being able to do, and that's what I've been doing in this class, is going over a lot of the basics. He's done a lot more stuff with animation and things like that, and which is great. And I'm sure he knows much more about it than I do. The problem is, I'm not going to sit there and ream on him. So I'm not going to say anything about him. I just wonder if the students are getting enough of the basics. I don't know. All right. So then we got Room, as it says. It provides a layer over SQLite. All right. And we will talk about that a little bit in the next chapter. Okay. And as it says, you can use the network when it's available to store and retrieve data. I've never done anything with Java.net or Android.net. All right. So that said, I'm just going to, well, Firebase. Notice it's a mobile platform that allows you to develop apps, etc. Okay. And they show some of the features there. That's fine. And again, you can come in and do your own customized stuff. Let's forget about that and let's jump into the shared preferences. All right, this is, even though it's only about 6 pages, this is what I'm going to spend 90% of the rest of the class on in here. All right, the first thing, as it says in that first paragraph, shared preferences can only be used, that's poorly put. Shared preferences should only be used to store relatively small amounts of data. All right. I mean, even in our list, you're probably not going to have a to-do list with more than, let's just assume, 100 things on it. That's not a lot. All right. But if we were going to have 1,000 things, 10,000, whatever, or if we were going to be doing something really complex where every one of these to-do lists would have big explanations and they would have pictures, etc., you wouldn't want to use shared preferences for that. So as I mentioned to you earlier, shared preferences is good for something like a high score, for different user settings. You know, if you want to let the user manage your application so they can pick out the background color, the foreground color, etc. It's good for things like that. But as they mentioned on the bottom here, for larger amounts of data, you want to use a database or even a regular file system for that. All right. So shared preferences, forget about this saved instance state. Let's just look at this. Persists across user sessions, even if the app is stopped, even if your phone is turned off. All right. Used for data that should be remembered across sessions. That's why I said things like a high score, a to-do list wouldn't be a bad example. Represented by a relatively small number of key value pairs. By default, as I mentioned, with the context mode private. All right, it's private to the app. And as it says, a common use for it is for storing user preferences. All right. We're going to be using shared preferences APIs, not preference APIs. All right. So when you start going through this, some of the stuff that we do tomorrow will look a little bit weird. What I've been trying to do is I've got this here, from our book, and I've got a couple of articles that I've found online, which are pretty good for using this stuff. A real common usage for shared preferences, and I'm sure you've all done it, is I'm sure you all have an account someplace where you go out and you put in your username, you put in your login, and then they ask you whether or not you want them to remember it. So the next time you come in and you log in again, your password will be filled in, or maybe everything is automatically filled in for you. That's a real common use for this, just so you know. All right. You only need one shared preference file in an app, and when you're starting to name it, hopefully this looks familiar, the com.example.android, etc. What's going to happen is your shared preference file will basically be the name of your package, and then on the end, you'll slap something on the end, and again, you'll see it tomorrow. All right. And here is the context mode private right here. All right. As it says, the mode argument is required because older versions of Android had modes that allowed you to do other things. You're now strongly discouraged for security reasons to do anything but context private. When you do this, there's two things. You want to be able to save your shared preferences. You want to be able to grab your shared preferences. So to save your shared preferences, it's the equivalent of doing like a set. But as it says, you get a shared preferences editor. Notice it takes care of all the file operations for you. You add key value pairs to that editor using put. When you use put, And it's very similar to what we did working with intents. You can do like a put int, a put double, a put string, but there's also something that we'll use tomorrow that's called a string set. It's not exactly an array of strings, but it's sort of treated like one. Why is that important? Because if we've got a to-do list and we do a put string, all right, unless we use something like a string set, it'll take whatever one we just put in and it'll overwrite whatever is in there. Again, you'll see it tomorrow. All right. When you do this, as mentioned, you also want to call the apply function. All right. And as mentioned, it'll save your preferences asynchronously off the UI thread. So in other words, it'll save it for you and allow your program to keep going. So even if it took a while, it'll save it in the background, so to speak. You can use either apply or commit. Commit's the older way of doing it, and it's recommended that you don't use that. We will use apply for everything that we're going to do tomorrow. So we're going to do something that's going to look similar to this tomorrow, which again might look kind of weird to you, but I think it'll make a lot more sense when you see it in action. All right. I think I've told you in the past, I've taken several courses online. One of the ones I took online, I'm basing the to-do list that I'm doing tomorrow off of a course I did online, trying to add a few things to it, change a couple things around that I didn't like the way that they did things. All right. So we just talked about saving your shared preferences, but then you'll need to restore them when you're done. All right. And so again, it's kind of like I said with an intent to do a put and then do a get kind of thing. So again, you will see this tomorrow. When you're all done, there's a couple different ways that you can clear shared preferences. All right. I want to set it up so that, for example, we'll have a setting at the top of our to-do list where if you click on that setting, if you have 100 items in there, and it'll come out and say delete all. And if you click that, boom, it'll delete all of them at once. When you do that, there's two ways that you can do this. You can either do a clear, like they say right here, or you can create a brand new set that's empty, which basically does the same thing. All right, so again, that's what we're going to be working with tomorrow. We're not going to probably do too much with listing for preference changes. And that pretty much is it for that particular section. So again, they go into app settings here. Are we going to touch that? Well, if you have ever looked when you are running a program that if you've ever, the stuff that we've done, we haven't done anything with app settings. But what we will do tomorrow, since we're going to choose the basic activity, what you'll notice is at the top of the screen, you'll have 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner. And when you click that, by default, it says settings, where you can go in there and you can set your user settings. We're going to change that. So when you click that, it's going to ask if you want to delete all of your to-do list items at one time. But if you want some more on playing with app settings, so if you want to let the user go in and actually change different settings, this is where you go in and do it. All right. I've done some work with this, not a lot, but they talk about different ways that you can do it. In some apps, you put it right up here in the upper right-hand corner. In some apps, you open up what's called a drawer over here on the right, and you allow people to change it that way. So there's different ways that you can do it. They talk about this in here in some design guidelines. The big thing is when you're working with this is that it should be intuitive. In other words, when somebody is going to set or reset something, you should make it very clear in the instructions. All right. The other thing is, that especially when you're working with a phone, that you're working with a limited amount of real estate. So typically you're going to use a drop down with words as opposed to using icons. All right. And I know it'll always vary. But they go through an example. Again, this is what we'll have tomorrow. But when we click on the 3 dots, rather than saying settings, it'll ask us if we want to delete all of our apps. All right. So you've seen this kind of things with settings before. You all have phones. You all have settings on your phones. You probably set them a lot more than I do. For instance, when I am driving with my wife, and if we are driving and taking, you know, our granddaughter someplace, she loves to play with my phone and watch videos on the phone. Well, when that happens, I have to go and I have to unsync Bluetooth with my car, all right, because otherwise she won't get any sound. And once it's unsynced, then she can just use the phone, go out to the internet and grab her stuff. And that's what they pretty much go through in here, all right? The only other thing, and that's pretty much it, but the only other thing that I really wanted to mention to you in here, it's twofold, and it's sort of an opposite thing. I've looked now, other than, like I said, for 8 of 10 of you, I have looked at what you're planning on doing for your final project. I don't have any kind of problem really with what anybody's doing. Don't try to do too much. You only have 3 weeks, but at the same time, don't try to do too little. All right. This should be something that you should put out there, and at least in an ideal world, you should take some pride in. All right. It's something that you may want to show a prospective employer. All right. So, you know, it shouldn't, you know, I mean, talk about it. It should work. I know that sounds silly, but it should work. All right. Second, the colors should be professional. The fonts should be professional, etc. We've worked on that now in other sessions. All right. As always, I will, and like I mentioned, I will have part 2. I will try to work on that as soon as I get done today. Next week, all right. Next week, when you come in here, we will be going over on Monday, part 10, the SQLite primer. All right, it's about 10 pages shorter than what we just went over. We will talk about it, but again, we won't talk about, you know, how to create a table, what the query language is, etc. We'll just talk about how it will be used. If there's any questions, I can take them. Otherwise, again, the rest of the period is a lab period for you. You know what's due, or you should know what's due. All right. Please, again, last thing, take a look at your grades in Inside Rankin. If you say, wait a minute, he didn't give me any credit for this. I did not grade the Zodiac tests that you took last week that are due no later than today. I did not grade those, but everything else, as far as I know that I have from you, should be graded. And the 2 of you who have not yet turned in your project specification and your project balsamic, please get those out there as soon as you possibly can, because you are currently 0 out of 250 in your grade. And as you can guess, that's really affected your grade. All right. So I've got the notice about 10 minutes ago that I'm just about out of time because I get 40 minutes on these. If anybody has a quick question, fine. Otherwise, if you have questions, just feel free to email me. I'm sitting here in my bedroom where my temporary office is, and I'll be on for the rest of the day. All right. Other than that, you can drop off. I will see you tomorrow where we will build a to-do list app together.